I'm Margaret Hale, and I don't scare easy. But I know a real threat when it buzzes on my kitchen counter. Sarah Hale, my daughter-in-law, left her phone by the sink after our Tuesday coffee, the screen lit with my late husband's face again. The message under his name said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Beautiful." Bill Hale has been dead for 5 years. I chose his blue suit and folded his flag. Yet his name smiled up from Sarah's phone like it had never left my life. My hands went cold the way a room chills when a window cracks. I stared at that message and counted my choices. I could put the phone down and pretend the world hadn't shifted. Or I could read the thread and face whatever storm was already here. Silence buys nothing but more damage. I opened the messages, same place as always. One read, "Kevin's working late." Another added, naming my son as if our family's rhythms were their clock. "Love you." Closed a third, neat as a signature. The dates stretched back for months. There are rules about privacy that decent people keep. There are also rules about not using a dead man's name to hide a living lie. I chose the rule that protects the living. The air in my kitchen changed from grief to purpose. Sarah had been kind to me, and I was kind right back. She organized Bill's papers and brought over soups. Now the same care felt like cover. A hand on my shoulder, guiding me away from the truth. I slipped on my coat and took the phone. If this was a mistake, I would fix it quietly. If it wasn't, I would end it loudly. Either way, I was done being managed by ghosts. The next morning, the phone still sat on my counter like evidence from a crime I hadn't agreed to witness. I told myself to return it, to act normal. But that message looped in my head, same place as always. My curiosity had already crossed into survival. So, I scrolled through more of their conversations until the coffee in my cup went cold. Each text read like a love letter stolen from my past life. "Miss you already. Kevin's out late again. You make me feel alive." My husband's name sat above every word, turning the screen into a graveyard of lies. It wasn't some stranger who'd inherited Bill's number. Whoever was behind it knew my family. The logical side of me searched for simple answers. Maybe it was coincidence. A random man with my husband's name texting the wrong woman. But the timing was too precise. The tone too intimate. Whoever wrote those messages had been inside my walls, knew my son's schedule, and spoke the way my husband once did when he wanted something. I didn't recognize myself as I grabbed my coat that afternoon. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I drove through the same quiet streets I'd driven for decades, following Sarah's silver SUV as it turned away from downtown. She had no idea I was behind her. The October light slanted gold across the windshield when she pulled into the Riverside Inn. Not a family restaurant, not a business meeting place, but a hotel. I parked across the street, pulse loud enough to feel in my throat. Minutes later, a dark blue sedan arrived, and out stepped Marcus Reed, Kevin's boss. I watched him smile and kiss her like it was a ritual. It hit me then that this wasn't a new betrayal. This was routine, practiced, familiar. The messages, the secrecy, the phone, all pieces of a performance that had gone on for months. When they walked inside together, my shock cooled into something solid. My daughter-in-law was meeting my son's employer under my husband's name. I didn't know what crime that was called, but I knew what it felt like murdering a memory in broad daylight. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's hand resting on Marcus Reed's arm, like she had replaced my son's touch with something colder and more profitable. By dawn, the disbelief had burned away, leaving calculation in its place. Grief had taught me how to endure pain. Betrayal taught me how to weaponize it. I needed help, but not the kind that judged or pitied. That's when I called Detective Nora Briggs, an old friend from church who had retired from the county fraud unit. She had the kind of mind that could follow money the way hunters follow tracks. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't call me crazy. She asked for dates, numbers, and patterns. Nora and I spent the next 2 days combing through Bill's old accounts. There were withdrawals, small ones, never enough to trigger alerts made every few weeks for years. The totals added up to nearly $15,000. Each transaction made on the same days Sarah came for coffee. The coincidences had become choreography. My husband's paperwork had once been stored neatly in his office, untouched since his death. But as I opened the drawers now, the files felt violated. Passwords scribbled in his handwriting were gone. Copies of tax returns missing. Nora's quiet voice confirmed my fear. Someone with inside access had taken what they needed. I called Bill's former business partner, Harold, at the accounting firm. He remembered a woman calling 3 years ago, claiming to be my daughter-in-law, asking for copies of financial documents. You said she was handling the estate, he told me, apologetic and shaken. She had known details no stranger could have guessed: Bill's middle name, his anniversary, even the last 4 digits of his social security number. Sarah hadn't just stumbled onto temptation. She had planned it, patiently and precisely, stealing piece by piece while pretending to help me heal. Marcus was her partner in deceit, but Sarah was the architect. I'd been her mark from the moment she offered to organize Bill's papers, smiling sweetly over my grief. That night, I looked at the framed photo of Bill on my mantle. I realized I wasn't just avenging his memory, I was protecting it from being rewritten by thieves. Sarah thought she'd mastered the art of quiet theft. I was about to show her that some women steal back louder. Sunday dinner at Kevin and Sarah's house used to be my favorite part of the week. It was a small tradition that made the world feel normal again after Bill's death. But that night, the smell of roast beef and rosemary only made my stomach twist. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there to watch how well Sarah could lie with a mouthful of my recipe. Kevin looked proud as he carved the roast, bragging about how Sarah had perfected Mom's version. I smiled, though every bite tasted like metal. Sarah laughed easily, her tone warm and practiced, leaning into Kevin's arm like she'd never known guilt. It was a performance for one audience, and I was sitting front row. When she poured me wine, I mentioned, as casually as I could, that her phone had been buzzing when she left it at my house. The glass in her hand trembled before she recovered. "Oh? Probably a wrong number," she said, too quickly. I nodded, watching her eyes dart away from mine. She didn't know I already had every screenshot. Dinner carried on with the politeness of a funeral reception. Kevin talked about his job at Reed Construction, proud that his boss saw real leadership potential. I watched Sarah's face soften with affection at Marcus Reed's name. It was the first honest emotion she'd shown all night. I kept my smile steady, the way you do when waiting for a trap to close. After dessert, Kevin went to the garage to check something on his truck, leaving Sarah and me alone in the kitchen. She busied herself with the dishes, pretending not to feel my eyes on her back. Her calmness was impressive until I asked about Marcus's promotion plans for Kevin. That tiny flicker of hesitation told me everything. When I left, she hugged me a little too tightly, as if testing how much I knew. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Sarah believed she'd outplayed me, but I'd spent 42 years married to a man who understood numbers and motives. I knew what came next in a scheme like hers, the part where the liar starts believing their own story. Detective Nora Briggs came over the next morning with 2 cups of coffee and a notepad full of questions. Her calm, methodical way of speaking steadied me, even as my anger burned hotter. She had traced a few leads overnight, and what she found turned my suspicion into certainty. Sarah Hale wasn't just cheating, she was building a system of lies big enough to live inside. Through Nora's contacts, we discovered that Sarah had quietly opened 2 new bank accounts under her maiden name. Both were linked to digital transfers from Bill's old investment fund. The movements were small, but consistent, and always made on days Sarah visited my house. She had been siphoning money under my nose for years, disguising theft as family visits. Nora advised patience, but I couldn't sit still. I started mapping out Sarah's movements myself, recording her work hours, errands, and those sudden, late appointments she mentioned to Kevin. Everything followed a pattern that ended at the Riverside Inn. Each visit coincided with another withdrawal. Sarah had turned my husband's memory into a mask and my son's trust into cover. We needed proof strong enough to expose her without warning her. Nora helped me set up a quiet trap. She contacted the bank under my name, pretending to inquire about possible irregularities in Bill's account. The moment Sarah heard from Kevin that the bank was reviewing old records, her calm veneer cracked. Nora's voice recorder caught her making panicked calls that same afternoon. I followed her once more. From the dental office where she worked to a downtown law firm, watching her walk in alone with a folder in hand told me what she was doing before I needed confirmation. She was preparing divorce papers, another layer of betrayal, one that would bleed Kevin dry before he even knew he was wounded. By the time I parked in front of my house that evening, the decision was already made. I couldn't protect Kevin with half measures anymore. He would never believe gossip or instinct. Only evidence and exposure. Sarah wanted to play this like chess cold, deliberate, and bloodless. But she'd forgotten something important. I'd been married to a strategist for 42 years, and I'd learned how to win quietly, until it was time to strike loudly. By Thursday evening, my patience had cooled into resolve. I drove to the Riverside Inn, the place where Sarah Hale's text messages had been born, where Marcus Reed's blue sedan always appeared on schedule. This time, I wasn't there to spy, I was there to end it. I waited in my car, watching the shadows lengthen over the parking lot, like a curtain before a play's final act. At 6:15, Marcus arrived, crisp as ever, in a collared shirt and cologne that didn't belong to a man headed home from work. 10 minutes later, Sarah's silver SUV slid into the space beside him. She stepped out in a black coat, adjusting her hair in the window's reflection before leaning into him with practiced affection. Their kiss was routine, almost businesslike. I'd seen enough. I walked into the lobby, calm as a woman ordering coffee. The clerk barely looked up when I asked for the couple in room 214. He smiled knowingly and handed me a keycard. That small gesture, his assumption that their deceit was ordinary, nearly undid my composure. I took the elevator, each ding of the floor sounding like a heartbeat. When Marcus opened the door, shock froze him mid-breath. Sarah appeared behind him, the color draining from her face. She started to speak, but I held up a hand. I wasn't there for explanations. I wanted the truth said out loud, not whispered behind passwords and hotel curtains. "You used my husband's name," I said. "You used my family like a stage?" Sarah tried to steady her voice, but the tremor betrayed her. She said I was mistaken, that I'd misunderstood. Marcus stepped forward, attempting charm, but guilt clung to him like sweat. They both realized too late that my silence over the past weeks hadn't been ignorance, it had been gathering. I told them what I knew: the withdrawals, the stolen documents, the divorce plans. Each fact landed like a hammer. Marcus's eyes flicked toward Sarah with anger, as if she'd failed to contain the fire they'd built together. Sarah straightened. her sweetness gone, her tone sharp and cold. She said I couldn't prove anything, that Kevin would never believe me. I smiled and told her she had 48 hours to disappear before the truth burned her down. Leaving the room, I felt no satisfaction, only clarity. They weren't clever criminals or forbidden lovers. They were parasites, and I'd finally learned how to remove them. The next move was theirs. But the game, from that moment on, belonged entirely to me. They didn't disappear. I knew they wouldn't. People like Sarah Hale and Marcus Reed don't vanish when cornered, they regroup. 3 days after the hotel confrontation, Kevin showed up at my door with Sarah beside him and a lawyer trailing behind. All righteous indignation and crocodile tears. Sarah claimed I was harassing her. That grief had twisted me into paranoia. Kevin looked exhausted, torn between the two women who claimed to love him. The lawyer spoke in rehearsed sentences about defamation and unfounded accusations. Sarah dabbed her eyes with a tissue like a stage actress who'd practiced sincerity in the mirror. I didn't argue. I let the silence stretch until it felt like truth itself was pressing against the walls. Then I went to my dining room and returned with the folder Detective Nora Briggs and I had built bank records, screenshots, photos, and the copy of Sarah's filed divorce petition. I laid each document on the coffee table. Slow and deliberate. Kevin's face went pale as he read. The photo of Sarah kissing Marcus outside the Riverside Inn seemed to drain the room of air. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "It's not what it looks like," she said. The oldest lie in the book, Marcus, who had been hovering near the doorway, stepped forward, only to freeze when Kevin looked at him with pure disbelief. Then the dam broke. Sarah dropped the act completely, her tone turning sharp, defensive, venomous. She admitted to the affair, to accessing my husband's accounts, to planning her exit. She even justified it, said she deserved better, that Kevin had been too small for her ambitions. Her cruelty was breathtaking in its honesty. Marcus tried to intervene, claiming he'd been misled. But Kevin cut him off with one word: enough. It was the same tone his father once used when something sacred had been violated. For the first time, I saw my son's strength steady, quiet, and final. When they left, Sarah's mask had cracked beyond repair, and Marcus looked like a man watching his empire crumble. I closed the door and locked it. Not out of fear, but closure. They thought exposure would destroy me. Instead, it destroyed the illusion they'd built. The collapse had begun, and I hadn't even raised my voice. 2 days after the confrontation, Sarah Hale and Marcus Reed tried to disappear quietly. They pulled their money, shut down accounts, and stopped answering calls. But I had already moved first. With Detective Nora Briggs's help, the fraud report was filed, the evidence sealed, and the police were watching their every move. We needed one last piece, their voices admitting what they'd done. I called Sarah, my tone shaking just enough to sound believable. I told her I wanted to end the fighting, that I would withdraw my complaint if she and Marcus met me one last time to make things right. She couldn't resist the bait of control and money. She agreed to meet at Riverside Park, the same place where her affair had thrived in secret. When she and Marcus arrived, I handed over a briefcase full of marked bills and asked why our family. Sarah smiled, proud even in Roan, and admitted everything: how she'd studied us, how easy it was to play the grieving widow and loyal wife. That confession, caught clearly on the recorder hidden in my coat, was all Nora needed. Officers emerged from the shadows before the echo of her laughter died. As they were led away, Sarah glared back at me with fury instead of fear. Marcus hung his head, already defeated. The sound of handcuffs closing was quieter than I expected, more final than satisfying. Revenge wasn't about noise. It was about ending what others thought they could control forever. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom as Sarah Hale and Marcus Reed faced their sentences. Marcus pled guilty to fraud and conspiracy, taking 10 years in exchange for testimony. Sarah stood proud until the very end, denying remorse as the judge handed her 25 years. Justice didn't roar that day, it whispered, calm and absolute. Kevin sat beside me, his hands steady in mine. He was rebuilding. Slowly. With someone new, a woman named Lisa who spoke softly and loved honestly. Watching him smile again reminded me that revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about reclaiming what they tried to steal. Sarah took years from us, but she couldn't take the truth. At home, I replaced the glass on the window she'd once shattered and set Bill's coffee mug back on its hook. The house felt lighter now, alive again. I understood then that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's knowing the pain finally serves a purpose. People think age makes you fragile. They're wrong. It makes you precise. When the world underestimates you long enough, you learn exactly where to strike. And when I did, I didn't miss. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who still believes kindness can't be broken, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice keeps our stories alive.